Goldman Sachs fell about 12.8% when the news broke. This was the golden child of Wall Street, basically unscathed by the financial crisis. What did you think of those news?
Yeah, morning, Mashudu. I think it's politicking at its finest. You must remember inside of the Senate, the Democrats are one vote short of a filibuster, which means they could basically pass whatever they wanted. So they got 59 votes and the Republicans got 41, and they used to have that. They used to have 60. And now in an attempt to push through banking reform, they're pointing fingers at, as you pointed out, the golden child of Wall Street, who, as you mentioned, came through this largely unscathed. And in fact, the reason why they had to borrow money is because they were forced to go to Washington in a time where everyone was staring over the edge and banks weren't lending to each other and the spreads had widened to basically all-time highs. So I don't know, I think it's politics at its finest, but it is having a broader impact globally. You know, you see in Japan's down nearly 2%, which is interesting because you would think maybe people would think twice before hitting the sell button. I'm not too sure what the implications are. You know, ironically, the Goldman Sachs credit default swaps ballooned out as people had to pay more insurance in order for the debt covered by Goldman. But ultimately, to me, it's everyone is to blame. If you want to point fingers at one specific party or one specific organization, that's all very well. But just remind me, weren't the government the people who set the rules? You know, and there are no fingers pointing back at themselves. It was the credit rating agencies that gave these CDOs the correct ratings so that investors could buy them and feel comfortable with them. Basically, 12 months later, on these specific CDOs, they were all gone, all the ratings. You know, they'd all been downgraded. So is it Goldman to blame, or is it John Paulson, who's the hedge fund manager, who's been implicated in this? Or is it the stupid investors who bought these without doing their homework? Or is it the government? I'm not quite sure.
Despite politics, banks are likely to be under pressure for most of this week.
There's a strong will to be able to create a new set of financial regulations. Sadly, I don't think they will work unless globally everyone agrees to a new standard, a new set of rules, and that will have direct implications for our banks here. So they've been talking rather tough, the Obama administration, but haven't quite had the political, it's not as if the will isn't there, they haven't quite had the support globally because, you know, you can bet that in some places in the world that have been less affected, they're not quite sure whether they want to proceed with such a hard-hitting bunch of new rules. And again, you know, politics intervenes in business whether you like it or not, and there's a strong will, not just from the administration in Washington, the Obama administration, but also on the ground. And you saw that in his support in the way he got elected. You know, he's got massive support on the ground.
Despite the Goldman Sachs saga, we've got the volcano in Europe.
I thought you were going to pronounce it for me.
I got it out of it.
We'll try Lorato later.
Indeed.
Yeah, it's costing a lot of money. You know, airlines aren't really, they're very marginal businesses. You know, you just have to go through lots of cases over the years to be able to see that, you know, running an airline is a very difficult business. So this isn't helping. Not too sure what it means. You know, maybe this is a snapshot into the future when you know, oil prices are way too high and we have to look for some sort of alternative. You know, and maybe this is just testing us out. You know, 30 years or 40 years hence. It's quite interesting because you know, these are events beyond your control and you have to adapt. And it's not quite sure whether or not you know, they're going to even be flying as soon as this morning, because that's what I was seeing on the news wires on the weekend, is that we'd be flying as early as this morning at 6 a.m. So I guess we just have to wait a couple of hours to see whether or not that does happen.
Indeed, a wait and see. US earnings season went off quite well last week. JP Morgan, Intel producing rather better than expected results, but Google didn't impress markets though.
Yeah, I'm not too quite sure about Google specifically. I think that there's a whisper number, which is kind of what the market expects, and then there's a consensus number, and they've missed the whisper number, but they were in line with the consensus number. And then there was GE, which for me was a defining moment of the week, because slightly ahead, and GE Money, which is basically their financial arm, was doing better than anticipated. So what I read into most of the results, whether they're chip makers or banks or industrials is that matters are improving out there. Things are getting better. So I'm quite fully confident that probably for the rest of earnings season you're going to see that. Maybe this short-term news about Goldman and the SEC will go away towards the end of the week.
And Goldman's due to release results on Tuesday as well.
Again, it's highly political motivated because everyone's going to look at what they're going to look at first, not what they managed to make on their investment banking, but what the size of the bonus pool is. And I think that's obviously what's irritating the general populace and obviously Washington, and this is a backlash.